All right, folks, welcome to the Monsters, Madness, and Magic podcast. I'm your host, Justin, here with a quick word before we dive in. Now, in this episode, I chat with actor Erick Avari about Zoroastrianism, Bollywood, adjusting to the United States, typecasting, the mummy, Stargate, Encino Man, and more. As always, thank you all for listening out there, and without further ado, here you go. Okay, Erick, take us back in time. You're a youngster. Are you a book reader, fort builder, troublemaker, or all of the above?
What was the second one? Fort
Fort
builder?
builder, building forts, outside.
Oh, as a little kid, we did have little cardboard castles. I did go through that phase. Definitely troublemaker. And reader, my father read voraciously. He was high school graduate, joined the military, and served in the Second World War. But he could talk about any subject to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
He had that ability, and he just loved his. And also, we grew up at a time when we didn't have TV. This is in Darjeeling, India. There was no TV. There were little transistor radios, or so your entertainment was. I don't want to say restricted, limited, because there were a lot of things we did. They were just different things.
Right.
Yeah.
So with the radio, did you guys have a lot of radio dramas playing or things like that?
Not a lot, sadly, because see, this was a time in India that it was shortly after independence.
Okay.
We, independence was in 1947. The British were out, and India sort of closed its gates, if you will, to
Yeah.
try to develop, industries within India rather than importing. And there was no foreign exchange. So, I mean, it was a complicated thing. Anyway. So as a result, we were limited to very, very select things. So even in music, for example, I didn't know who Chuck Berry was, but I certainly knew who Hank Williams or it was strange. So as a result, yes, we did read. But growing up, I still am. I was dyslexic, and I didn't realize. No one really knew what that was. So it troubled me, and I was a very slow reader, and it gave me time to let my imagination run.
I saw in your bio that your father operated some movie theaters. So was that mainly Bollywood movies, or were there American films playing, or?
Hi, it was another great setup. Actually, it was my grandfather who
Oh, okay.
owned the movie theaters. And my dad was a military man, just by way of it. And being the only son in those days, my grandfather was, you got to come back and take care of the business. And my grandfather never left the business till the day he died.
Yeah.
So and there's a point to that story. And we'll circle back to it because I'm sure you're going to ask. But yeah, movies, there were two movie theaters, the Capitol and the Rink. The Capitol was the town hall that my grandfather leased from the town and turned into a movie theater. And that's where we tended to get the slightly more esoteric, upscale type of movie because it was a smaller house. And the Rink Cinema was originally a skating rink.
Hmm.
Again, my grandfather bought it and converted it into a movie theater. And that's where all the big blockbusters and we had a matinee, which was a Hindi movie, an evening show, which was English. Now, it could be either a Western, or a Hollywood movie, or one of the British spy movies during the war. Those were big. And then at night, we called it the midnight show, but it started at 9 in a small
Right.
town mountains. And that was the local regional Bengali movie. So there were three different genres playing every day, and changed twice a week. So you had a big
Yeah.
turnover of movies in this thing. And the town was, if you've ever seen Cinema Paradiso, and this was the story of my town. It, everything, you know, centered around the movies. And what was wonderful was would start the movie and there were all these shorts and newsreel documentaries, whatever, you know, to warm you up. And then they'd start the film, and about 10 minutes, 15 minutes into it, it would be intermission. So you go out to the bar, get your drinks, get your snacks. You could take everything into the movies, you know, and that was the gossip hour, you know, and
Yeah.
you socialize and everything else. And it was just a wonderful part of, you know, the town. So there was, I mean, movies were a huge, huge influence on me.
Would you say that the majority of your youth was spent in India and then you moved to the US, or how was that split up for you?
Yeah, I was born and raised in pretty much Darjeeling,
Mm.
which, unlike most of the rest of India, Darjeeling's up in the mountains. They're called hill stations. It's these towns that the British set up, and they generally had good schools because they sent their kids to these places that had very temperate climates. They weren't as hot as down in the plains, and great place for them to come and vacation and visit
Right.
their kid, you know. So those were the hill stations, and Darjeeling was the queen of the hill stations, if I say so myself. So yes, I came to the US when I was 23.
Do you recall it being a culture shock initially?
Yeah, yeah. As I said, you know, I'd grown up with Hollywood movies. We spoke English. That was the vernacular. That was my medium. That's what we spoke at home, you know. But on the flight over from London to JFK, yes, to JFK, I was showing a movie, and it was WWW Dixie and the Dance Kings with Burt Reynolds. And it was set in the deep South. And the accents and the jargon and the link, I couldn't understand a word anyone was saying. And here I am on a plane, you know, flying to Charleston, South Carolina,
Wow.
ultimately, to become an actor. And I didn't speak the language.
I live in South Carolina myself, so that's funny.
Yes, yes, I know. Actually, my first play in America was at the oldest theater in the United States, which is the Dock Street Theater in Charleston, South Carolina.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
yeah, it's a beautiful little theater. But yeah, so that was the biggest moment of truth. Justin, I can't tell you how, you know, just trying to get here was an ordeal because in India at the time, as I was saying, they didn't have foreign exchange. So you were permitted to leave the country. You could take your Indian rupees with you, however many you wanted, but they were valueless the minute you left Indian shores. So you needed the foreign exchange, and then there was the question of black money. And my father was, you know, British Army officer. He's not going to do any of that stuff. So it just seemed like this insurmountable task to get out to America, you know, and having now finally done that, and it just got more and more convoluted at the very last minute. I mean, it was a stroke of luck that I managed to get in touch with someone who gave me, who really kind of felt for me, because I wanted to be an actor in India. I didn't want to. I don't really speak Hindi that well, and Bollywood was not what attracted me. It was Broadway.
Ah,
I wanted it to be on Broadway. I felt like my training was in Shakespeare. You know, I felt like that's what I might be able to get my foot in the door and do. After all of these tasks and I'm hurdles, I should say, I accomplished or got through somehow. And then at the very last moment, I'm literally on the plane and go, I don't speak this language. How did I miss that? You know,
Oh, that's
and and
hilarious.
I and I had this very strong standard British accent, that that's the way we were taught to speak, and that's the way and it just sounded so crazy. You can imagine Charleston, South Carolina. Here's this guy who looks like me, took this, this British accent, and it's like, where were you from anyway? There was always that little question at the end, people would go because they'd be trying to figure it out.
And it's funny, within South Carolina, Charleston has its own unique accent because I'm from South Carolina and I can tell when someone's from Charleston.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's got that gentler lilt, doesn't
Hmm.
it?
And
Very.
there's some a little bit of islander twang in there somewhere
Oh,
because they're near the water.
yeah,
It's its
yeah,
own
yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
And then there's that whole thing about Gitchy and Bella
Yeah,
and yeah, yeah. That's
it's a
fascinating.
very unique place.
Yeah, yeah. That was my first stop in America.
Wow.
Darjeeling, Charleston, South Carolina.
It's draped in America. It's one of the oldest cities, it's
Right,
just very historic place in
right,
America.
right, right, right. And now I just, things in my life have just kind of worked out in such strange and odd ways.
So before we get too far from your childhood, I like to ask everyone this question, which is, what scared you as a kid?
I didn't like snakes. My brother got me over that. You know how older brothers are.
Yeah.
It's that's a really interesting question. Things that scared me, I seemed to go and do. I didn't like caves, and yet there was this little, if we could really call it a cave, but as kids we would go crawl. And there was sections of this tunneling under big rocks, is what it was. It was where you were, inches away from the rock, and if you were at all claustrophobic, but I kind of made myself do it. It's interesting. I hadn't thought of that.
That's good though, conquering
Not
your
a lot of
fears.
not a lot scares me. In that sense, I think even physically, I've sort of threw my body at things, which now I'm paying for, but at the time it was a lot of fun.
What if we shifted a little bit? What about maybe fiction wise or film wise? Was there maybe a scary movie or something along those lines?
Oh, oh, um, my mother, we'd all go to the movies as a family, and it was she was notorious in the town for just being really getting involved and getting very scared and afraid. And she'd grip the person next to her, and she was a strong woman. She'd just lock on and squeeze mom, 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 to all the crucial points. And so, yeah, like Psycho, that was the big movie growing up. And my aforementioned brother, who's a bit of a prankster, he goes, "Oh, that's right. There was a movie called Dr. Sardonicus."
I've heard of it. I'm not familiar with it though.
Yes. And he goes, "Mom, you're gonna love this movie." He says, "What is it? It's not a scary movie." "No, it's a comedy. It's about this fellow who smiles."
Yes, okay. Oh, I remember it now. Yes, okay.
I think that's smart. Should never forgave him for that. But as a result, I guess we braced ourselves for that inevitable clutch on the arm whenever a scary moment came up on screen. But I loved those spy movies, during the war, and those moments where you felt like he could be caught or sussed out,
Yeah.
and get sweaty palms, yeah. It's funny, yeah. I also remember the other time, uh, a f an older schoolmate, friend of the family, and they were all staying with us, and he was performing in the Mikado as he was playing one of the women's roles, and his voice was cracking. It was an all-boys school, so we were like Shakespeare's time, played pants roles, and his voice was cracking, and over dinner just before the show. The family was talking about this, saying, I hope it doesn't crack on your high notes, and then going to see the show, sitting in the audience, and my palms were sweating for him.
Mm.
I was so afraid and nervous for him. He was fine, It's funny what the things that do scare
Yeah,
you.
yeah. And just in that same vein, I guess, what do you recall about your very first time on stage as a performer? Did it go smoothly?
You know, I can't remember the very first time. I was so young when I started doing
Mm.
it. And I have a photograph of myself. Now, we did elocution was part of the curriculum, and it's really old school, but you recited poems or you worked on a speech, JFK's speeches were famous, and so that was part of our curriculum in school since kindergarten. And then that led into plays that I did. There was a wonderful woman in our town. She was widowed, and she taught music for free to the entire town, anyone who wanted to come. And we had this group of kids ranging from 4 or 5 years of age up to high school, all taking music lessons from her. And then every year she would write a Christmas pageant that we would perform in her living room. It was a big house, but and all the townsfolk would come. And so I was exposed to it at a very, very early age. And I never felt I was always excited to do it. And I mean, I remember things happening that could have been disastrous, but somehow working through it.
So stage fright
Uh,
was never an issue.
no, no, no.
It's funny because, speaking with actors over the years, they say that as they got older, they actually get stage fright more.
I was I was going to add that. I think it's more as you get older. When
Mm.
you're young, fresh, I think also as you get older, one becomes a better actor.
Yeah,
You have more to draw from, and hopefully the nuances and all of that, and that's what you get wary about. Are you going to be able to hit all those moments? And maybe I'm just speculating.
right. And you mentioned earlier, now correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you said that your goal was to make it to Broadway. You did make it to Broadway, correct?
It, yes,
Were you
yes.
nervous for that?
I was honestly by that at that moment, just because it was Broadway and a Broadway classic, it was The King and I, and here I am on the stage, and it was one of those, look, Mom, Broadway, finally, it wasn't the movies or anything. It was that moment that for me just sort of embodied my dream of, you know,
So over your career, what would you say were are a handful of some of your favorite roles that you played on stage?
on stage, man. Favorite, smash down, all-time favorite that I failed completely at. And if I get another chance at it, I'm sure I'll fail again. But hopefully the third shot at it, I might, I might start to get there. And that is King Lear. That is the role I, I feel is the most challenging and demanding and something that you can I, I think Shakespeare's genius in writing that role at his age, to have brought in such a knowledge of age and power and all of those things that make us tick,
Hmm.
madness, jealousy, f- vanity. Uh, all these themes are just culminated in this play, and I just love it. I just love it. But a huge mountain to climb. And then I've had some really fun roles on off Broadway. I I think one, you know, I'm having a hard time saying this was my breakthrough moment or breakout moment because I've looking back, there were so many little moments that had they never happened, I would not be sitting here, you know,
Right.
just getting my union card for starters. That was such a catch 22. You couldn't join the union, the stage union, unless you had a union job, and you couldn't get a union job unless you were a union member. So it was just, years of 3 years of doing one horrible, Justin. I mean, we're talking horrible play after the other. Um, and interspersed with some, something that might have a hope at going off Broadway. And then hopefully you will go with the show, with the production, and then get your equity card. But there were just so many ifs. But I guess the moment I was thinking about was at the understudy part. I had a job at the Joseph Papp Public Theater. That to me was even more than Broadway. By the time I got to America and learned more about, the structure, and I realized it was the off-Broadway scene that's cutting edge and happening and all that stuff. Broadway was the musicals. And I had an opportunity to understudy this role in a David Hare play. It was a wonderful role. And then I got a shot at going on in it. I did two performances, and that legitimized me in the New York theater scene. So
Yeah.
that to me, a big, big breakthrough. And then, so then from there, I started to get better venues in the regional theaters and better roles and all that stuff. So yeah, there was that Victor Mehta in A Map of the World. It was wonderful, wonderful part.
Mhm.
And then but theater again, the variety in genres is
Yeah.
so much greater or more dramatic than on film or TV, because
Yeah.
TV, it's okay, you're doing sitcom or episodic, that's your, you know, but you could be doing Shakespeare on stage, or you could be doing something contemporary. You could be doing a farce, broad, uh, highly stylized pieces. And there was a piece that I did at the Guthrie Theater called The Screens, and it was the start of a wonderful collaboration with this director that I just adore. And again, that I think was another highlight moment in my career, playing these really sort of very extreme characters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you mentioned fun roles. So if you remove all external factors that go along with it, like, pay, rehearsal, travel, do you have more fun as an actor on stage, on screen, or in a voice booth, what have you?
Good question. I mean, I've had a lot of fun on shoots, especially location shoots,
Yeah.
where and like paid vacation, and there's been a lot of, and generally, those have been the ones where the work hasn't been forefront, and I'm thinking about like Home Alone 4. Okay. No one was really terribly worried about their performance the next morning. You know?
Right.
Here we were in South Africa at a time when the rand was terribly depressed and the dollar was just, uh, very strong. We had a blast. I mean, we were living large and just, you know, but the work was,
Yeah,
it was
secondary.
more, right? But in terms of having fun on in within the work,
Yes.
I think there are times when you're on stage, and especially when something happens, the gun doesn't go off, or it's something like that, and it's exciting, and you all come together. It's that moment of you fix it now, here and now. you
Yeah.
know,
No safety
you have a
net.
live audience out there, no safety net, and then or just those moments when you're flying. It's like uh, a, a virtuoso singing, and they hit a zone, and it's all the mechanical stuff just drifts away, and you're just that's just happening automatically, and you're just in that moment to moment locking with the other your scene partner and flying.
Yeah.
You know, that is magic. That is magic.
Agreed. Speaking with actors, you always hear the term method acting, but to me, at least from the folks I've spoken with, it seems like each actor has their own specified method that they've pieced together over the years through working or through other actors. So, what is your method?
Yeah, it's exactly as you said, pieced together, from all the. I never went to. I, I got my master's at a state school in New Jersey, but other than that, I never really took classes. When I moved into New York from Jersey, um, a lot of my friends were, at the Herbert Berghoff studio or whatever. I mean, I did get involved with the Actors Studio, but that was later, and it was more part of an association, not as a I'm taking classes,
Right.
you know. Um, and but I obviously got to work, I was working with people from different educational backgrounds, you know, different schools of thought. And I take little bits and pieces, but at the end of the day, actually, I found that the and I still hold this to be true, but you got to keep working at it, is that acting is actually very simple. I don't think, the 101 level, okay, you learn that, But beyond that, it's tell yourself that one lie in the beginning before you start. You tell yourself, okay, now this is the truth. This is real. And then just go from there and tell the truth as that character knows it,
Mm,
you know.
right.
At the end of the day is, I think, what I'd like to strive for, and there's no real technique for that other than concentration, you know. That's the
Mm,
key. And keeping everything fresh, not trying I the older I get, and I think I've become a much better actor than I was starting out. Although, when I was starting out, I thought I was hot shit. I thought I never had to study lines. I'd read it a couple of times, boom, I was done. Especially with Shakespeare, because you've got that iambic pentameter to keep you on track, and it's very easy. It's like
it's almost musical, like a, yeah.
it is yes, short, long, short, long, short, long, yeah. And And I mean, I remember, feeling like you'd work with an older actor whose memory wasn't so good, and feel a little like, oh, come on, man, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah. But what I failed to clock was what that old person was bringing to the table. There's something that I didn't have a clue about,
Yeah.
you know, you know.
This comes with time.
It comes with time, man. Time and humility and living life.
Mm.
That's yeah.
Something I always hear is not judging your character. The bad guy does not know he's the bad guy, so you can't play it as I'm the bad guy. Things along those lines.
Yeah, but it's so funny you say that because I'm one of these. I do a lot of driving. I don't fly, so I drive my travel van, and I listen to these podcasts, crime things, because they keep you awake. And and I constantly am putting myself in the position of the villain, because that's what I played most of the
Yeah.
time. And I was like, okay, if I'm playing this part, what justification? What did that person tell themselves that, yeah, it's okay to go ahead and decapitate this other person, what was that conversation in your head like?
Yeah. How do you
I
justify that?
I love it. Just because you can always find something. And yeah, that's exactly the right thing, is you never go out to play a bad guy. He's always the misunderstood one.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So have you done any acting coaching or anything like that?
Never, but a couple of months ago, friends of mine did have this acting class, and they asked me if I'd do a workshop, a Shakespeare workshop. And I did. And it was the first time I've actually had to sit down and organize my thoughts, because I've never really broken it down before. You were talking about technique. I've never, we all know, the one-on-one stuff, here your beats, here's your motivation. But I think a lot of my education actually was as a literature major. That's what has helped my acting technique in terms of breaking down a character, finding common themes in the script, being able to analyze a script and a character has helped me much more than any acting class I've taken in terms of forming a technique. It's my belief. Um, where was I going with this?
Oh, I'll just ask you if you had done any. You were talking about the workshop that you
Yeah,
did of Shakespeare.
teaching.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really, I did enjoy it, and I'm going to look into doing more of that.
So through
Yeah.
your years working and just you just mentioned the workshop, but on top of that, through your years working, what would you say is a common pitfall that young actors fall into?
Getting caught up in the whole rat race. It's inevitable. It's not just, it's inevitable. But I think it's an element of, I'm just speaking from me, from my point of view, because the business is so demanding. When people say jump, you've been waiting for that moment for, however long it was.
Right.
And when they say, okay, you're it, you got to jump. You drop everything else, and that's what you're doing, whether it's a job or an audition or a meeting, whatever, right? So your your life, your marriage, your friendships, everything takes second place to that, you know. Um, and I think then burnout or cynicism,
Yeah.
I think those are the things that can hurt you. And and it's too bad, because every actor, I would say 99% of the actors that I know got into the business because they loved it.
Yeah.
Some, that 0.1% have just fallen into it and just become huge, and that's it.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's what you yearned to do, right? and you can't do it unless someone says gives you permission to do it. You know?
Yeah.
Unlike a musician, that's what I think you find a lot of actors love to play music because there is more of a sense of control,
Right.
that you can create without a big mishigas around you.
Well said. So, you started on stage, obviously. How did you land your first screen role?
Uh, well, first I had rather than the first screen role was while I was still living in New York,
Mm-hmm.
and I was doing a play actually at it was the one I was talking about, the Map of the World, David Hare's piece that I understudied and performed at the Public Theater. And then I got an offer to play the role in a theater in Minneapolis, which is what I was doing when my agent called me and said, I'm sending you a script. They're not going to fly you out, but they will see you for an audition. And I've arranged it for Monday, which is your day off. And this is got your name written all over it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the movie The Beast of War, ultimately called The Beast of War, with George Zenza, Jason Patrick, Darn Harvey, Stephen Bauer. And it was this movie that was originally a play, now being turned into a film, and Bill Master Simone wrote it. Beautiful script. And it was about this Russian tank that gets lost in the Afghan desert. And it's sort of like a Das Boot, the movie about the submarines in a tank. And
Ah.
that was my first movie, but I still considered myself a New York actor. I was a stage actor and all that stuff. And I think it shows. But I got to Hollywood actually quite by accident. I went on a 2-week vacation, and it was actually Jason Patrick. It's funny how this comes around. Um, he was living in LA at the time, and after the movie, we became good friends, and he would stop by and stay with me whenever he was visiting New York, and so. And I'd always, knock Hollywood and Oh La La Land and all of that stuff. And then he said, there was a time when he goes, wait, you've never been to LA? I said, no. Why would I want to go? I said, got everything right here in New York. And he said, man, I don't want to hear another word out of you about LA until you come and visit. He said, you come and stay with me. And then after you actually spend some time here, you can knock it all you want. And so I did. I had a couple of weeks off between gigs, called him up. I said, I'm coming out. And one thing led to another, and I got a job while I was there. And then I had went out for another audition, and I got that job. So I had to cancel the play that I was doing back in New York, or going to be doing. And and then my wife came out because it was Thanksgiving, and she was like, "Wait, how much are they paying you for this again?" It was one day on LA Law, and it was more than an entire run of an off-Broadway play. And good,
Yeah.
that's 2 months. That's 2 months of every day, man. This was one day, one long day, but you know.
Yeah.
So we packed our bags and came to LA thinking this is like taking candy from a baby.
Exactly. So
Uh,
Eric, you've obviously done your fair share of film and television. Do you have a preference between the two?
you know, as years go by, I love film.
Hmm.
One is my body won't hold up to theater anymore. I broke my back doing theater actually, and it's just it's a demanding thing, you know. You're doing 7 performances a week,
Yeah.
in and week out, that's hard on, you know. I really admire the older actors that have maintained that discipline, because it really takes it. But film, what I love about it are the nuances.
Mm.
And that's something that it's only with time that I've started to appreciate more and more and more and start to, I think, get better at it.
So this may not be the first film you'd expect me to ask you about, but I want to ask you about your role in Encino Man. I can't tell you how many times my friends and I growing up were like, "We's in the Jews, we's in the
I could tell by the look in your eye. I was either Encino Man or Adam Sandler, but
Yeah.
okay. So Encino Man, I had just I'd been in LA maybe a year or so, and I was doing a lot of TV, and I kept telling my agents, I was like, "Man, I'm a movie guy. Come
Yeah.
on, get me into the movies." And they were like, and and I had experience in ad libbing and improvising, certainly, and they came up with this thing. They said, "Look, there's this very big casting director was casting this movie, and it's with Polly Shore, but they're looking for theater type actors who can improvise and work with it. And it's this Indian 7-Eleven guy. At the time, that's all you saw. And if it was an Indian role, it was the 7-Eleven guy. You
Yeah.
didn't see doctors or lawyers or, like you do today, And so anyway, I go out for this audition, and they said, "Look, just we want you to meet this casting director. She does a lot." So I was like, "Okay," and I went in and started, and I started out kind of moderately with the role because I was just improvising, right? So I wasn't bound by the lines and stuff. And as I went along, I was getting bigger and bigger laughs. So then I started, goofing it up a little bit more, really playing with it. And they were just howling, right? And they were like, "Hey, great, great, great. Thank you. It was very nice to meet you." I was like, "Yeah, yeah, nice to meet you too." Oh, also, my experience in New York was if I'd gone out for a 7-Eleven character or something like that, I never got it. It was a Puerto Rican fellow who would get the role above me. So I wasn't really expecting to get this, but I wanted to go in and have fun and try to, have the casting director remember me for something. And I remember that when my agent called and said, "Hey, they're booking you for the gig," and I was, "Oh shit, those were my words." I said, "I was just kidding." They were like, "No, no, no, they loved it, they loved it," And I said, "Man, I really took it very broad. And I remember Jonathan was my agent at the time. He said, "Eric, you read the script, right?" I said, "Yeah." It's Polly Shore. This ain't going nowhere. Just take the money and run. Buy your wife a nice Christmas gift. We'll call it a day. I was like, "Okay, okay." You know. So now they've started shooting, and I'm in for this one day, sort of in the middle of the shoot or whatever. And things I heard were not going well on the set because Polly was ad libbing, but then he wasn't able to duplicate it for the take after take, right?
Mm, yeah,
So
yeah.
they were having a hard time putting everything together and all this stuff. And then by the time I got to the set, it was like, "Okay, no more ad libs. We're just going back to the script. That's it." I was like, "I've got 2 lines. Just 2 lines in the script." I'm like, "Whatever." I was a little, put out. But I did it, um, and I look back at it and I think, again, that wasn't script. I didn't think of doing Jews. It was only when he did it, I just did it, and I think that's what made it funny was it's not he's not trying to be funny. He's actually thinks that's the way it's said, maybe, or whatever.
Yeah.
But and then after that, I could not. They it was just one Indian role or ethnic role after another, and one of those types, and yeah, it was on the trailer. I couldn't get away from it.
Uh,
So,
did you not enjoy that, or
I
was that a,
didn't.
yeah,
I didn't. I just because it was such a stereotypical
yeah.
character. Two lines, and that's all it was there for. And I didn't. But as I said, I thought it was just going to come and go. Okay, so now I've got a part B to this story. So jump cut to. I mean, it was totally Brendan Fraser who carried that movie, and just he's so charming in it, and it was like he really. I mean, it was a good surrounding cast too, and it really played very well. Uh, jump cut to oh, I don't know, a decade later, maybe. I'm in Marrakesh. I just gotten there, eating my breakfast outside, and I hear this voice behind me go, "Thank you for letting me wheeze your juice." It was Brendan.
I didn't even make the
And I
connection.
wheeled on him, and I was like, "You." I said, "You the one who set my career back 5 years." And he goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, eh? How did I do that?" And I told him the story, and I said, and after that, I just could, I mean, people just wouldn't see me for any kind of generic part. It was always the 7-Eleven guy or the Indian guy. And up until that point, I'd not played an Indian role.
I I can't believe I never made the connection between you and Brendan Fraser and Encino Man and then The Mummy.
Yeah,
It just
yeah,
it
yeah.
just hit me right then. I forgot Brendan Fraser was even in Encino Man initially.
Two Academy Award winners in Encino Man. Mm.
Wow.
And the filmmakers, they did that documentary, Hearts of Darkness. If you've ever get a chance,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
about Apocalypse Now. It's a wonderful, wonderful documentary. And then they went and did Encino Man.
So, I have to, in 1994, I believe it was with Stargate. Was that a typical audition for you? Does anything stand out about it in retrospect?
Yeah. Yeah. The thing that stood out about it most was the hundreds of people, actors, were assembled. I mean, there were just hundreds, and they were running behind, and all this stuff. It was taking forever. And it wasn't again. This was one scripted line in the screenplay. There were moments where they, in the rubrics that say we see Kasuf talking to or whatever, but there was only one scripted line. And I was thinking, should I turn it down? Not what? No one knew anything about what this was. But again, they said, we're looking for people to improvise. And I thought this whole thing of the language barrier was really challenging. I'd once done a play like that. I'd played a character who was speaking a foreign language, and so there were challenges there where you're saying something and I'm totally misunderstanding it, whatever, fun stuff. So I thought that would be something I could play with, but I remember it just took forever. And finally, they called me in, and the reader was finishing lunch, and Dean and Roland was sitting in the house, and I just walked in, basically in character, and I didn't even look at them. Because the first thing I noticed, I smelt it, was the food, and I just zeroed in right in on that, because there was that thing with the candy bar, and I figured, hey, he's setting me up right here, you know. And then we went from there, and and then he played along and gave me a five, whatever, and I spoke in Nepali to him,
Yeah.
it made it more kind of like, yeah, I'm actually speaking a language. It's just I don't know what you're saying, but I'm a real person. I'm not some you know what I mean, some stilted character,
Yeah.
and they loved it, but they were actually looking for an 80-year-old. That was what they wanted. They loved what I did, and if that now talk about having fun. It was so much fun working on that set. Really hard conditions, 130, 135 in in the shade, down in Yuma, Arizona. People were dropping like flies, sand. There was a lot of flu going around, all tough, tough conditions. But I think because of that, we all banded together, and it was just a wonderful bonding experience. And it was so fun working with Roland and Dean. They were a great partnership because Roland, he in his jocular sort of way, he was always looking to bring in an element of humor, which I'm right there, and and he'd let me play or suggest something, well, that's right. He'd say, "Oh, and maybe you could say such and such." And I'd be like, "Easy for you to say, but I've got to go and get the Egyptologist to actually translate that." And then learn how to say it all while you're setting up the lights. But cool, I'm game.
Oh,
It,
that's
it was
hilarious.
a blast. I had a blast. I like challenges,
Mhm.
and I mean, what wasn't fun about Encino Man was there was no challenge.
Right, yeah. We mentioned the mummy earlier, and to me, in my generation, that's just the definition of a summer blockbuster. That's what I think of when I think of the mummy. So when you're working on the movie, could you tell that you were working on something special, that something special was brewing?
Yeah, yeah. I also had that feeling doing Stargate because
Ah,
just what with Stargate, the cast was enormous. I mean, I remember the first night at the hotel, I got my call sheet and I called my wife and I said, "You gotta hear this." Okay, so tomorrow I've got 15 principals, uh, 35 shepherds, 12 elders, so on, and then at the bottom, 35 dune sweepers. It was like, because they had to keep those dunes pristine, and like going to lunch, everything was people had their battalions, and you were in that battalion, and you got that thing, and it was crazy. They were building roads. They were doing these things that was Desert Storm technology. These huge, they were like those beer can holders, except
yeah.
6 feet deep, and they'd roll them out and then just drive the ATV over it, and it would pack in like a honeycomb. And then you had your road, you know,
Wow.
and amazing sets. Oh, I mean, the detail on those sets was just amazing, you know. So there was that uh, with Stargate. But then with the Mummy, there was something. It was different. It wasn't the size of the sets or anything that felt different. Um, we had a hint that the special effects were going to be very special,
Hmm.
um, and that was very arduous, tedious. After every take, cut, freeze, hold, and then they'd come and measure from eyeball to eyeball, and this to that, and then to that, and all these measurements, and they take that, it's frozen there, So, but Stephen Summers, I got to say, that guy, man, he makes me sick. Young fella like that. I mean, he was cool as a cucumber. This
Wow.
huge budget, it's like his second, really third, maybe, feature, but this was by far the
Yeah.
biggest.
Yeah, for sure.
And to be cool enough to stay, uh, um, keep that sense of humor and sense of fun about him, I think was really admirable. I marveled at that, because it's so easy for someone in that position to go, okay, it's not working. Fuck it. We're just going to cut that. And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're like, yeah, maybe you can do it. And we'd tease it or something, and make a little joke and give it another take. And, it
Yeah.
was on a lighter level. And it was a blast. It was a blast. He was the guy that I really took my hat off to on that one.
He was the
So
glue.
yeah, and everything comes from the top,
Yeah.
you set the tone, you set the mm, sensibility, and if you don't have that control, then I think things down at the bottom start to spin out of control, and you get it's got to be a unit. It's got to be one machine moving.
Have you ever had an experience that you would consider supernatural, paranormal, or an event you can't explain?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've had certainly premonitions or things of that nature. And my father, he was hunter back when he was in his early 20s. And then he became a conservationist after that, but in the Bengal forest. And he has talked about things that have happened to him that are so, and they're actually like family stories now, they've been passed down to through the generations. And I definitely feel a presence every once in a while, or there are moments when I will feel like there's something that's not here that is communicating something to me, but
Yeah.
specifically, I'm probably not. Yeah, I mean, I know with my father for sure, he said specifically that he heard his mother's voice come down and tell him, "Don't take that path, take this path." And having taken that path, he comes upon a leopard that was actually waiting to pounce on him had he taken the low path.
Wow.
There's so many things like that he would just talk about. I had this gut feeling not to do that. And,
Yeah.
I think there is something out there. What it is, it's hard to define. But it's so arrogant for us to think that we're the only, you know,
Oh, yeah.
creatures.
100%.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, it would be. I think I leave myself open to, I'm not. Perhaps because my father would preface these stories with, "I'm a British Army officer. I don't, you know, believe in these things, but, and then he would say, saw it clear as day
Yeah.
about a time when he was driving down. This is once he became chief game warden, and he drove down. There was a terrible downpour, the monsoons, floods. The river had swelled, and my dad didn't swim. He grew up in the mountains, and I guess mountain streams, whatever. But he was not a swimmer, and he was about to cross the river in his jeep, and he heard a voice, and it was the head man of the village beckoning him, and saying, "No, come here, come here." And so my dad followed him, and he showed him the path, and then disappeared into the forest. And you crossed the river and realized just how perilous it would have been had he gone upstream where it was deeper, etc. He gets to the village and says, "Where's the munshi, the head man fellow?" And he goes, "Oh, he died last week."
Oh,
You know, yeah,
that's a story.
yeah. And there was several like that.
Now, do you consider yourself religious or spiritual or anything along those lines?
Spiritual.
Hmm.
I'm definitely spiritual. Funny, I was just thinking about it this morning. I was born a Zoroastrian. I grew up in a predominantly Hindu country, uh, but I was educated by Jesuit priests from middle school through college. So I had, and it was a very Darjeeling, a very strong Buddhist influence. Dalai Lama, yeah, because the Tibetan refugees, when China invaded Tibet in 1951, that was a clear. They came through the Nathula Pass. The refugees, just fled for their lives. And Darjeeling, Kalimpong, that it was part of that migratory route. And these were highly spiritual Buddhists, and which is the reason they were so easily overrun. They didn't have an army or, didn't see the need for it. And these were elevated people anyway. So, yeah, I had all these different influences, on me, which I think was good because it didn't close me off again.
Right, a lot of viewpoints.
Yeah, yeah. And I think at the end of the day, it's like how I see what religion means to people and how much solace it brings people, I get that. I don't, to me, it doesn't bring me solace to simply say prayers, but to meditate. And I was told this was one of the things that I've saw. Okay, Zoroastrian priests, they chant in a manner that I kind of stole a little bit of that in Stargate when I did the prayer, stole from that chanting. Um, but apparently these tones are set together to induce meditation.
Ah,
It's like ringing a bell, the Buddhist bell, the ring and the thing. It helps you to get into that zone, right? That
right.
zone. So to me, it's getting into that zone. However you do it is what's important, I think.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well, Eric, just to put a bow on this thing here, is there anything on the horizon you want to share? Anything in the pipeline coming up for you?
Let's talk about that. Okay, so I don't know if you know about the series The Chosen.
I've heard of it, yes.
It's a huge phenomenon, man. It's crazy. It's like one of the most watched worldwide, and it's gotten insane. Anyway, I did season one, and then I was gone, and but I did come back for season five, but we can't talk about that on social media. They're doing a big reveal and all of that stuff. So that'll be January sometime that we can talk about it. So we won't talk about that.
Gotcha. Is just to ask you, is Philip Shabazz in The Chosen? Does that ring a bell? The actor Philip Shabazz?
The name sounds familiar.
I want to say he's in that show, but I could be confusing it with another one.
That name sounds familiar.
He
I
plays a
don't know.
priest, I believe, maybe.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It could be.
Okay.
It could be. Was away from the show, and then I
Yeah,
just came
yeah.
back and I 4 days and then done. But yeah, it's a man. It's phenomenal. You talk about things that started out. I did it because after I left Hollywood, um, I was having the time of my life. I bought an RV and I was just driving around, living the life.
Right.
And I had my back surgery. My dog died, and I was feeling low. And then the script came to me. And I was like, wow, that's a really well written part, you know. And in fact, I even told the director the first day that we talked, I said, Dallas, you know, this might sound odd, but I don't know if you realize how good this role is, you know.
Right.
So why are you offering it to me? You could get a really good actor for this thing. Full circle.
Well,
Yeah.
Eric, it's been a pleasure
You
chatting
just,
with you.
are you still in South Carolina?
I am. I'm
What part of South?
yeah, I'm in Edgefield, which is about 30 minutes from Augusta, Georgia, but still in South Carolina.
Oh, okay.
So near the
Okay.
border of Georgia and South Carolina.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yep. And before we get cut off again, I just want to tell you, thank you. I appreciate you, and it was a
I
great time.
really do apologize for stringing you along for
No,
so
no,
long.
no, 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 no.
Had good intentions, but it was just I've been crazed doing bought a house here, sold one there, and moved somewhere else. All this
Hey,
shit. So,
it happens, man.
yeah,
We got it done.
life, life. Yeah,
You have a great
yeah.
rest of your day, Eric, and I'll send a link to
You too. I
Carla.
hope you had a good Thanksgiving.
You too. You too. And bye bye now.
All right, man. Take care. Bye.